give up. Try and save yourself. You are young, you can get home, you can get another child. You can't do anything for him. Let him go. There were about 15,000 children in Theresienstadt from 1940 to 1945. And out of those 15,000 children, only about 100 survived. And I am one of the 100. I started studying a bit, trying to find out what happened, trying to bind together the many very different and fractioned bits and pieces of our story my parents had told during the years. But I think what was important and the reason why I ended up by deciding that it should be a book was that our story was completely different. The Germans who had occupied Denmark decided to go in action against the Danish Jews the 1st of October 1943. My parents got an opportunity to escape to Sweden the 4th of October. We were arrested about 500 meters from where apparently the boat would come in the evening or during the night. The 23rd of November, we were then all transported to the harbor, southern part of Denmark, brought to Germany. And the idea was that we should head for Theresienstadt in the Czechoslovakia, where all other Danish Jews already were. The railway system was damaged and the train stopped. They took all the men, the Jews, including my father. They brought them to Sachsenhausen, and women and children, they were brought to the concentration camp, Ravensbruck, nearby. When we had been in the prison a couple of weeks, it was, I think, about a week before Christmas, I got terribly ill, and the Germans removed me from my mom and from the other Danish Jews. After some time, she was taken also to that barrack hospital. While we were there, we both of us got weaker and weaker. And there was a Russian woman, and she said to my mother, and that was really a sign of how far out my mother was, her health was, and mine as well, that she should let me go. And try and take care of yourself, and if you ever get out of this hell, you will probably be able to get another child. But as my mother explains, of course she couldn't do that. The 23rd of April, we were both taken to a train which should lead us to Theresienstadt. So we were actually the only ones who arrived in Theresienstadt that day, and we were the very last Danish Jews who came to Theresienstadt. My aunt explained to my uncle how the situation was when my mother and myself arrived to Theresienstadt, after I was almost 6 months in Ravensbruck. And she says, and I say it in Danish to use the exact quotation of what she said. Vi fik så at vide, at Karen og Ib var kommet. Hun så forfærdelig ud. Hun havde difteri og nervebetændelse. Hendes mund var trukket helt op i siden. Hun var halvvejs døv og kunne næsten ikke se og havde ingen følelse i fingre eller noget. Jeg kan huske, hun havde nogle sko på med noget snørehalløj i. Der var ikke nogen snørebånd, og Ib var fyldt med sår i ansigtet. Vi måtte ikke komme den nær, omfavne den eller noget. I was hospitalized a lot of the time the year we were in Theresienstadt. I got tuberculosis and a number of other diseases. And I was at a point hospitalized or in a nursery room or whatever with about 100 other children who had also various kind of diseases. My parents came one afternoon to visit me, and when they came, the room was completely empty. I was the only child left. All the doctors, the nurses, all the children were not there anymore, and my parents obviously didn't know, but it appeared quite clearly that they had all been transported to Auschwitz and perished in Auschwitz. So that was really a sign that the Danish Jews were treated completely differently from how other Jews were treated. Count Folke Bernadotte. He negotiated with Heinrich Himmler, who was the head of SS. He managed to get permission by the Germans to get Danish, Norwegian, and also other nationalities out of some of the camps. And the buses went to Theresienstadt, and they arrived the 13th of April 1945. Then the 15th, we were told that there were buses waiting for us. We drove on, and she also explains how uncomfortable it was because the buses were cramped with people. And there was a bench in the middle, and with that bench there were no, I don't know that word in English, you couldn't lean back, so it was very uncomfortable. We were taken to a coastal resort, west coast of Sweden. The war was not over. We arrived the 18th of April, and we had to stay in that camp, I would call it, until the end of May 1945, when we then finally got the permission to go back to Denmark. Can you imagine, can you guess how long time you should be silent if you keep 1 minute of silence for every one of the 6 million Jews who were killed during the Holocaust? And the answer is astonishing, or the calculation is astonishing. I tell them you have to be silent for almost 12 years. It's a bit difficult to relate to big numbers of people who had perished or not perished or been taken away to one camp or the other. I think the individual story is important for people really to get an idea what was going on. I try and tell the story in a very objective way, about the facts, what happened here, what happened there, why did it happen, what was the circumstance, etc., etc., and not doing too personal. What was necessary for me while I was watching, listening, and writing was to so to say, to shield myself, not trying to do it too emotional. There were moments, a lot of them actually, when I was sitting on my own writing and crying. My wife doesn't even know that. But most of the time I tried to listen to it, to watch it, to write it in a way as if it was not me. It was only when I started watching it carefully and preparing for how it should go into my book that I realized a very, very strange thing. She didn't even once during that 1 hour and 15 minutes mention my name. She didn't even say my son. She only said the boy. And when she explained about everything, it was as if she was talking about another person, not herself, but something outside herself. And I take it as a clear sign that she wanted, in a way, to shield her from emotions. And that has been the way in which I have formulated the language or used the language in my book, trying not to be sentimental, emotionally exposed.
En seng at sove i, og det var bare så lækkert. Det var meget rørende. Ja. Og så kom vi så ned til færgen, og der var min mor så nede. Det kan jeg altså ikke til. Det var helt utroligt. Så det var bevægende. Så folk stod og vinkede. Der kom så en, jeg tror det hed landsfiskården, og hun sagde, nu får de taget det løven, nu er det i Sverige.
When I started writing, I took it as a kind of therapeutical process with a stupid knowledge. I hoped that it would help me, but I was pretty sure it wouldn't, and it hasn't.
Per har briller allerede, da han...
Han fik briller, da han var...
Han havde de her store hænkestensbriller.
3 år eller sådan noget.
It was more this feeling that it somehow took up what he went through during the war. It sort of took up more and more of his, not time necessarily, but it took up more and more his, he thought more and more about it as the years went on.
I think what is interesting is that I remember my grandparents talking a lot about it during my childhood, but I don't think my dad really engaged much with it, but he closed off whenever anybody wanted to talk about the war. He wasn't really sort of open to hearing about it, and it was just all too terrible and didn't want to dig into the past. And I think with writing this book, he ended up spending a lot of time all of a sudden going into the material. And I suppose it coincided with his dad dying and his mother being older, so she was there to tell some of the stories. But then afterwards, the interest has increased, and I think that turned into a book eventually.
Yeah, it was always in the back of my mind, at least, that horrible things could happen and did happen, you know, to our family, but also around the world. And in some ways, there's quite a big discrepancy between the extremely peaceful, secure, stable childhood that we've had.
That's true.
There's quite a big discrepancy between that and the stories we've heard.
Holocaust was so terrible that one should have hoped that it would be the last Holocaust story in history. But later on came Cambodia, the killings of the Iraqi Kurds, Bosnia, Rwanda and Darfur. This book is dedicated to my children and grandchildren in the hope that they will live in a time where these kind of cruelties stop. I hope I feel a kind of relief because it has been a tremendously, at least in my mind, tremendously long story. I have worked on it for quite a number of years now, finding material, browsing things at the National Archives, listening to my mother's and my aunt's story, and also to my grandparents' story, and it is, there are sequences in those stories which are extremely painful, and I hope in a way to throw everything away from my mind when the book comes out, but it's probably a false hope. But at least it will not every day be physically present as it is now.